Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex. And today I want to talk about the worst 30 characters meta snapshot, because I've made several top 30 character meta snapshots in the past and more recently for February. And a lot of people in the comment section are inquiring and wondering and hoping to see a bottom 30 list, which would be the 30 theoretically worst characters in Marvel Future Fight out of 153. Now, I did hesitate to make this list, so I do want to make a few things clear before we get into the list. One, try not to take it personally if your favorite character or your top built or top ranked character is on this list. I'm not doing it to spite anyone specifically or to hurt anyone or any of the fans. Two, this list is difficult for me to make because I don't have every single character maxed out at tier 2. So I am going off of a lot of things that I've heard from other players. I talk to them every day in my live stream, finding out they've tier 2 this character or that character, and their performance just wasn't good enough. Really disappointed in the damage, disappointed in the survivability, and I try to keep all of these pieces of information and catalog them to make as good and as robust of an opinion as I possibly can. So if there are some errors to be made, this would be the most error prone list because it's the first one, so we can iron out all of the mistakes or any changes that should be made in the comments below, so please let me know. And then finally, I am taking these characters into consideration overall, and having had them or having them at tier 2 maxed out, what they are capable of doing, and how much they're going to need assistance to do even basic things like low-level Shadowline stages. I think that's one of the easiest things for any character to do. Just go in and solo stage 1 of Shadowlands, and you'll find that a lot of the characters on this list cannot do so without an extreme build, without additional pieces helping them, leaderships, support characters, switching, stuff like that. So we'll start at the top of the list because I guess that's where we should start, and that's where we usually start with the normal list, with Jean Grey and Quicksilver at the top of the meta. I think Hogan and Fandral are pretty well put at the bottom of the list, unlike Volstagg, because they just don't have anything going for them. Both of their tier 2 passives are very, very poor. Hogan's only activates a 50% chance when he's attacking for 20 seconds or for 10 seconds, then you have to wait another 10 seconds. So his tier 2 passive is basically active 25% of the time that he's being a tier 2 character, which is pretty embarrassing. Despite the fact that he does summon the other characters, he doesn't have any other way of protecting himself, no iframes. He does have some crowd control effects, but it really hurts to try to use Hogan in any situation whatsoever besides as a leadership. Similarly for Fandral, as a speed character, he has super low stats, so the fact that he's summoning anything, even with 125% of his stats, is already at a huge disadvantage to him. And it's funny because even Netmarble realizes that Fandral is bad. In his character usage tips, they tell you he's a speed character and he can use Fandral's formation to an advantage to summon Volstagg and Hogan, who are combat types. So even the developers of this game acknowledge that Fandral has a tough road ahead of him. While he might seem like a good character and he might seem like someone who you want to build up because of the passive and because of the 30% guaranteed dodge, he really doesn't have any way of protecting himself, and even at tier 2 he's going to struggle mightily to deal enough damage to guard break enemies and to even do low-level Shadowland stages. Hawkeye may not be the third worst character in the game, but I'm definitely putting him here as a point of contention. He is an Avenger. He deserves so much better than he's getting, and it's sad that we have to hold on for the hope that with Infinity Ward he'll finally get a uniform, despite having a plethora of looks in the comics already to finally boost his damage, boost his survivability, and do him the justice that his other Avengers brothers and sisters like Captain America, Thor, Hulk, etc. have all already gotten. Kingpin, a forgotten character of this game, he relies solely on his summons, and even with 500% of his stats, his summons would still die in the blink of an eye. They're just not doing enough, cannot compete and compare to the damage output being held up by characters in the game nowadays. And his tier 2 passive literally is all about his summons, so there's just nothing to this character. He's a one-trick pony, and his trick has long since expired. Speaking of characters who have expired, Deathlock. Although his tier 2 passive seems pretty impressive, guard hit, increased skill damage, his tier 2 passive was announced, it was introduced into the game with a patch, and I never saw a Deathlock after that, and I haven't seen a Deathlock in months. I don't know who has tier 2 Deathlock, I don't know why, but I just don't hear a peep from anyone, so my guess is, even with a uniform, it's pretty rough out there for Deathlock fans. Jessica Jones does have a leadership, and I have seen sparks, kind of glimpses of her ability to chain attacks in Shadowland, but it's really difficult to stop her from dying. Even with 100% immunity to mind damage, she dies in a few seconds. She's nothing like Luke Cage, her counterpart. Gorgon, Giant Man, and Moon Girl all kind of suffer from similar things, very low damage, and then they have very low survivability on top of that. Even though Gorgon has iframes with his skills and he has decreased damage received, even though Giant Man has immunity on his 5th skill and decreased damage received, even though Moon Girl has iframes and Devil Dinosaur, and she has her tier 2 passive, it's still just not enough. These characters die in the blink of an eye. For Agent 13 and Black Cat, I think the problem more so lies in their damage. Although they can survive, they just deal out really sad damage. Even with her tier 2 passive, she's one of the lowest DPS characters in the game. It's just really sad. And Black Cat, I've discussed before why her tier 2 passive is one of the worst in the game. Yeah, 20-second cooldown for a 10-second effect. So again, her 60% of the time, you get 50% of her tier 2. Congratulations. You are a very difficult character to get anything done with. Up next on the list, we got Drax, and Drax kind of gets flown under the radar. He is definitely the long-lost Guardians of the Galaxy member, although he has a cute tier 2 passive with Revenge because it can give him immunity. With Cry for Blood, it's on a 12-second cooldown. So that means every 6 seconds you get 3 seconds. So you're immune half the time, but Drax doesn't do any damage, so it doesn't matter. Red Skull, he's all about the summons, but either as a blast character or as a speed character, his summons die in an instant, and he's got nothing else in his kit to make him worthwhile. His tier 2 passive looks promising with the damage dealt and decreased damage received, but just not enough to make him a worthwhile character. Wong, on the other hand, despite the fact that he has a pretty impressive Master of Camouflage tier 2 passive, 40% crit damage, 30% crit rate, he is nothing like someone who has a very similar tier 2 passive in Ulysses Claw. Wong doesn't do any damage. It's just really sad. His damage is super low, no iframes, 1 defensive ability. You basically only use Wong for his leadership, which gives him kind of the mini Luke Cage treatment. Hulkling, someone you probably expected to see at number 1, is not actually the worst character in the game, I think. While his tier 2 passive is quite bad, his overall kit is not that bad. He's got iframes and he's got a lot of damage, and he even has some CC. So he can definitely clear low-level Shadowland stages at tier 2. He's definitely more used to you and easier to use than someone like Hogan, like Fandral, like some of those top 5 contenders. Next up, we have a character that I have tier 2'd, Ronin. This character is just straight up bad. It's all about the leadership for him. He does have a lot of crowd control, but it doesn't really work. In Shadowland, in low Shadowland stages, it does work, so you just need to worry about his damage. But in high Shadowland stages, the crowd control effects don't last as long, so it says 3 seconds, but it only lasts for 2 or 1 second, and it doesn't really last very long in any PvP, so you can't use him there. And even if you do manage to crowd control, remember, his actual damage is pathetically low, even with a legendary uniform, even with obelisks and ISO 8 sets and Uru. He still does really jokey damage. It's rough out here for a Ronin fan. Next up, a character that I've featured quite a bit, MODOK. He's definitely not lacking for damage, but the survivability is what makes him a huge liability. It's very difficult to do anything but Shadowlands with MODOK, and even with his tier 2 passive, it's very hard to see him doing anything much of at all, considering that he doesn't get any additional survivability from that. Next up, we got Rocket Raccoon and Hellcat. I think both of these characters have decent damage. I think Rocket's is probably better than Hellcat's, but they both lack for survivability. I think that Rocket Raccoon is a pretty decent comparison with the likes of Sin. I actually originally had them a lot closer together on this list. They both do good damage, but they both can die in the blink of an eye. And even though Rocket has an iframe, even though he's got a heal on his 5th skill, it's just not enough to protect him at all. They would probably be better off with a guard hit or a little bit of immunity, but that'll be for another uniform for another day. Number 20, number 21, Gamora and War Machine. Similar characters. War Machine has no iframes. Gamora, now with her latest uniform, has 1 iframe. They have multiple uniforms, but nothing's really giving for either character. They're not going anywhere. They can both dish out some pretty decent damage. I think War Machine's a little bit ahead of Gamora, but they both die in seconds, which is kind of a theme of a lot of these characters on this list. Next up, we have Sin and Jane Foster. Again, similar kind of situation. I have Sin at tier 2, and while I enjoy how her skills look and how she looks, she dies really fast sometimes. A couple of hits and she's down. Very hard to keep her alive with only 2 iframes, and even with 2 iframes it's still very hard. And from what I hear, it's a very similar story with Jane Foster. Her tier 2 passive sounds amazing, 60% lightning damage, 30% guaranteed dodge, but apparently she still dies really quickly, which is a disappointment. Number 24 on the list, Ulick. Just not a very powerful character, just underwhelming overall. Despite having the physical immunity, despite having a pretty decent, well-rounded tier 2 passive, he's basically only going to do work for you in low-level Shadowland stages, and he's got a bonus for being a villain, but overall it just has a very low impact on the game, and he's not going to bring you a lot of value with his tier 2 passive. The last group of characters I have all at tier 2, 25 through 30, and they've disappointed me massively in various ways. Shang-Chi is probably one of my biggest regrets for tier 2. It just doesn't do anything. He's useless. Even in Shadowland, I can't find a place for him. His damage is low, he's got 0 crowd control abilities, and he dies really fast. He's got the trifecta of bad setups. Blade is no different aside from the damage. He can definitely dish it out, but he dies really fast. He has got no crowd control, no iframes, no way of escaping or protecting himself, and it's just frustrating to use Blade even as a fan. Daredevil is in a similar situation. Despite 30% guaranteed dodge, he just cannot dodge all of the death kills and damage coming his way from his various enemies. She-Hulk, kind of a little bit different situation. She can definitely survive a lot longer, but with only 1 iframe and very low damage, she just doesn't get enough done in the time from when the battle starts and when she ultimately dies. So her situation is kind of the reverse. She can survive, but you're just kind of struggling to your inevitable death because her damage is very low, and she basically can only do 1 versus 1 situations because of how her skills are so small in their area of effect. Aside from her 5th skill, she really can't even stun 2 enemies at the same time with her crowd control abilities, which is super frustrating. Warwolf, I was hesitating putting him on this list or not, but I think the era of the Warwolf tier 2 passive applying to the team has come and gone. I think with Shuri now and Valkyrie and Phil Coulson far outweighing the value of Warwolf, in addition to the fact that I can't say his name, in addition to the fact that so many characters have guaranteed dodge or guaranteed crit rate on their tier 2 passives, in addition to the CTPs, which now give so much crit damage as part of their effect. He just isn't used anymore, and as a character he is one of the worst. Really low damage, even with his own passive applying to himself. He just cannot do anything, definitely can't protect himself. All of the above, all checked off, all in need of serious fixing. Finally, at number 30, I put Amadeus Cho. Even with a uniform, even with a very impressive self-buff on Gamma Explosion, I find him a very underwhelming character. You could probably sub him out for a couple of the other characters that I didn't mention on this list, but you'd think with so much of a boost, you'd think with iframes, you'd think with a uniform, you'd think with a pretty decent jack-of-all-trades tier 2 passive that Amadeus Cho would do more for you, but then he just doesn't. He's really only good for Shadowland, and even at that, he struggles compared to a lot of the other heroes, a lot of the other combat types, so I decided to put him at number 30. Keep in mind for this list overall that these characters, and why I'm listing them here, is to take into consideration for you to not make the decision if you're trying to be efficient and you don't want to slow down your progression in the game. getting these characters to 6 stars, building them up, getting them to tier 2. It's more of a cautionary list. I'm not trying to make fun of any of these characters. If anything, I want to shed some light on the situation to get them fixed, to get updates for them, to get character rebalancing for them, new uniforms, the whole works, and also to educate you guys and inform you so that you don't go around tier 2ing the worst characters in the game and then being mad when your second tier 2 of your account can't clear any of the endgame content. So let me know what you guys think of the list. Critique it as fairly as possible. Subscribe if you enjoy the content and you want to support me, and of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.